Welcome to the virtual Power Teams podcast, now with AI. And today we have an exciting guest, Craig Wallace. We knew each other for years. We worked together. We've been establishing professional shared services and project delivery on a global scale back in the years. And now we just realized 13 years after, we are together again. And Craig is one of those people who has been a senior manager in the IT space. He's been a CIO, and he will tell us more about himself. But also he brings a very practical perspective towards AI. He's one of those leaders who actually implemented AI and have a real life experience. So without any further ado, Craig, please tell us who you are and what you do.
Yes, hi Peter, and great to meet you after such a long time again. I remember those days fondly. In a nutshell, I would say 30 years inside industry. Pretty much most of the senior IT jobs, as Peter said, ended up CIO. About 10 years ago, I crossed over into the consulting side to do that and run their strategy practice globally. And then recently left and started a new startup, which is changing the game on strategy and hence the use of AI. So towards the end of the career, and decided to have a bit of fun, I think is the best way to describe me.
Excellent, excellent. And the key word was democratizing strategy. I'm not sure if English
Yeah.
is not, how would you say, democratizing?
Yes.
Democratizing strategy. So why democratizing strategy? What are the key trends that happened, and why now we have to democratize strategy, or if not have to, what is the benefit? So why democratizing strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this came about as I said, that 30 years in industry. I work with most of the consultancy companies, and they have a certain way of doing things, right? You tend to have a strategy. They come in for 3 or 4 months. You go through the exercise. And then when I moved over to consulting, I wanted to change that. And at the time, I wanted to digitize that consulting process, right? And we did that. And then COVID hit. And unfortunately, we just won a big strategy project in Canada. And we couldn't turn up and run the workshops and put the post-its up and start working on the strategy. So we gave them access to our tool. And what happened was suddenly more people got involved in the strategy. They put more people involved, met more frequently, a lot more discussion, better content. We finished it in half the time. And actually, there was a lot greater buy-in because these people were involved and it had become their thing. And that was the pivotal moment for me where I realized that actually we've got to democratize the strategy process. We've got to push it out into the organization and have more people involved so it's more inclusive. And I think that's when we started to talk about the democratization of strategy. If you think about the approach to that was that kind of 3 months every 2 years, that doesn't work anymore, right? Because the world's moving faster, it's more uncertain. So you certainly need something a lot more dynamic, a lot more instant. But also what I think is happening is it generally, as you'll know about this, is purpose, the drive towards purpose-driven organizations. People want to make a difference, and they want to be recognized for making that difference, right? And so why are we not allowing them to actually be involved in the strategy work? Why are we giving that away to other people to do and actually not enabling them in the organization to do one of the most important things where they could make the biggest strategic difference and get involved? So I think the drive towards purpose-driven organizations and people wanting to do this work is the reason why you also need to, I think, democratize it within the organization if you want to really keep your motivation and engagement levels up. And we know organizations struggle with engagement, right?
Yes.
Especially around things like strategy, and they struggle with the communication and execution of the strategy. And that's often because it's done in a small team over here and it's not involving everybody. um, and I think we want to be closer to the customer. We want to make decisions closer to the customer. We know we need to innovate more. We know we need to drive growth. Well, maybe the answer's within the people within the organization, if you can connect that and turn that on around this space. So that's kind of a bit of a long answer, but
Yes.
that's how we
Yes.
kind of came around democratizing the strategy process.
Excellent, brilliant answer. And I think millennials and the new generation to come, it is a no-go. Unless you involve them, engagement, who is an issue, as you say, it will be, yes, a no-go. So maybe can you share a bit more, democratizing? How can you have a more consultative approach to involve various stakeholders, needed all stakeholders in this strategy building process?
Yeah, so I think first of all, we come from the premise that you've got to have something to enable this, right? Sort of, and I'm going to say the word platform to enable this, right? That's an important part, because where are you going to put the information?
Mhm.
And if you've got a single place to put the information, then you can, multiple people can have access and you can share that information. But also, as we move in this fast moving world, you can keep that up to date faster. So I think, without going into too much detail, a platform is a prerequisite. Once you've got
Mhm.
that, right, I think the second thing is you've got to kind of recognize that strategy isn't part of people's normal day-to-day job. They may not have done it before, right? So there's
Mhm.
an education process, right? You've got to
Mhm.
help enable your leaders in the organization to actually think more strategically. So how do you help educate them? How do you give them the tools to be able to do that? Um, and then you've got to start getting them involved. And I would say not once every 2 years, but almost involved on a weekly or monthly basis. So
Mhm.
it becomes a habit, but it also becomes part of their day-to-day routine. So how do you do that with strategy? You might take a person and say, your job is to monitor what's going on with our stakeholders.
Mhm.
And what we want you to do is to assess the stakeholders once a month and see if anything's changed. Over here, you may say to somebody, your job is to keep an eye on the competitors
Mhm.
and see what's changing around our competitors. Your job might be to, or a couple of people's job might be to keep an eye on the customers and looking at the customer trends and what they need.
Mhm.
And so I think part of this kind of approach is breaking it into small pieces,
Mhm.
giving people small pieces to do. That's part of their job.
Yes.
So what
Mhm.
you do is you start to populate this information, and when you suddenly get a groundswell where a lot of things are changing, you say, hey, now's the time to get together and maybe consider our strategy and whether we need to change anything. But by then, everybody's got a role to play.
Okay.
Everybody's got some insight and intelligence to bring to the party. And so they feel that they're not just turning up in a workshop saying
Mhm.
something and not hearing anything again for, like, they're actually
Yes.
playing a real active role as part of their job, and they're learning about that. They're learning about what drives these organization strategic changes, and
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
starts to suck them in, I think, and then that's when you start to get the organization buzzing.
Excellent. Excellent. Sounds very, very pragmatic to me. Now, platform is a prerequisite. In your case, you mentioned you had the platform, and that's how you were able post-COVID. You giving the roles, that's great. People educate and giving them a role so they could contribute. I would be interested to know how many people you mobilize in terms of maybe percentage of the organization, just to get a feel. And the other question is, how do you ensure that they maybe co-create, collaborate? Do they work in silos, as you say, customer, competitor, and so on? Or you have a smaller groups that meet and then you have a bigger workshop? Just a little bit on the dynamics that from your experience really add value.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, in terms of, I would say traditionally in a strategy process, an organization would, involve 20 or 30 people traditionally in the old way,
Okay.
right? And there was a very much a mindset of we need to keep this a little bit secret, right? Because
Yes.
because it's strategic. And then they would say, but people in the organization don't know what the strategy is.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we have this dilemma. So when you now look at what we're talking about, we're talking about maybe the involvement of 200 to 300 people across the
All right.
organization. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
a 10 times improvement in the kind of I'm going to use the word leadership of the organization, but I'm not
Mm-hmm.
implying any hierarchy in that because, of course, leaders are everywhere, and it's
Yes.
picking the right people. So that's part of it. I think, as I talked about, there's this kind of part of your day-to-day job, but there are certain things you as an organization will want to review on a regular basis. And so you could have a workshop of people to do that and
Mm-hmm.
have that to be 3 months or 6 months, certain things to do. But also, I think there's a little bit around looking at the information and as I said, when a lot of things are suddenly changing because maybe there's quite a few unpredictable events happening, you realize that actually now's the time to pull people together into a workshop to talk about it. The difference
Mm-hmm.
is you're coming in with a lot more information around that, and I think we'll talk about AI. I think has a phenomenal role to play
Mm-hmm.
in helping you bring that intelligence faster so that
Mm-hmm.
you're actually looking at your strategy and making decisions faster. It
Mm-hmm.
might be that the result is not to change the strategy, but you've assessed it and you've had a look.
Mm-hmm.
Or you may decide to make some tweaks over here. You may decide, actually, this is so disruptive. We do need to have a few more strategic workshops together with the community to actually put that forward. But I think also what we found is when you move to a digital way of doing your strategy, it's not just in the workshop. We all know for example, innovation. We all know the best ideas come after the workshop when you walk in the
Mm-hmm.
dog in the
Yes.
shower, right? So you need a way to capture those right on the platform.
Mm-hmm.
That is true of other elements of the strategy, right? What will happen is you may have a workshop where you come together, but afterwards it's the discussions that are happening among people where some
Mm-hmm.
great ideas and thoughts come. If you're doing that and you've got that ability for those people to have access to a platform, then you're capturing that data digitally and sharing it with the wider group. And so that stops you
Yes.
getting these little pocket side conversations that tend
Mm-hmm.
to happen where suddenly the rest of the group doesn't know what's going on.
Yes.
I think that's
Yes.
really, really important.
Yes. Great. Amazing. And just on the engagement, do you run it in a fully transparent way? So you say like 200 people get more actively hands-on involved, but the others have full access and they can also provide feedback. How would you run,
Yeah.
across the whole
So
organization?
exactly. So up front, you may do many things. You may run surveys and questionnaires to get
Mm-hmm.
wider information. You may have kind of community group meetings where you pull a bunch of people together and have a conversation around a certain topic to get their ideas. You're going to do town hall communications, following the event and stuff. So, some of the best practice, I'd say, which you talk about a lot, right,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how to engage people, communicate, and involve them, those are still true, right? You're still
Mm-hmm.
going to be doing those things. In fact, more so.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only difference here is the topic now has become really an interesting topic for them to talk about, which
Mm-hmm.
is the
Mm-hmm.
strategy. And, people would measure and talk about 70% of the people don't get the value from the strategy because they can't execute it. And when you look at the communication, right, then what happens is people go, I don't understand the strategy. I don't
Yeah.
understand how my job relates to the
Mm-hmm.
strategy. And therefore, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what do I need to do to make a difference to
Yes.
help the strategy. And so by greater inclusion and involvement, you're starting to
Mm-hmm.
address those issues, which is
Mm-hmm.
starting to increase the chance of your strategy delivering the results you're hoping for.
Excellent. Is there, you mentioned a few trends already, but what current trends in strategy development as such, the audience needs to consider when they before or during they start their next strategic review?
I would say, and this is a key point for me, and you kind of saw this with digitization, right? We'll have a digital strategy.
Mm-hmm.
No, you need a business strategy, which has
Yes.
digital in it, right? And so these strategies around, let's say, these key trends shouldn't be bolted on. They should be baked in from the start. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would say in your strategy, key trends, sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
That should be part of your strategy, right? What are the products you're creating in a sustainable
Mm-hmm.
way? How are you getting them to your customers? How are you dealing with waste? What are your sustainable operations? That should be all based into your strategy. A big one at the moment, which I think has come along, is resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Being a resilient organization, and I think this is because what we've seen is, and resilience to me is shock and stress.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've seen shocks, right? COVID obviously was a shock. War, right?
Mm-hmm.
Disrupted supply chains, shock. Uh, Ships getting stuck in the Suez Canal, shock.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Bridges collapsing in Baltimore, shocks.
Mm-hmm.
Disrupted the car imports into the US. So we're seeing organizations start to say, we need to think about how we should be more resilient as an organization, as a business. And I think this is because what's happened in the world is everything is more connected, right? We know that network infrastructure, as we're seeing these geopolitical trends, right? Back, reversing globalization, right, and becoming more.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing is an increase in these disruptions and shocks that are hitting organizations. And so organizations are saying we need a strategy, but that strategy needs to not just deliver the traditional things of, growth and profit and sustainability, but they also need to be resilient so that actually when people invest in us, right, there's some continuity of that and we're not going up
Yes.
and down because of these shocks. And so I think resilience and sustainability, I say, are two big topics
Mm-hmm.
that are driving people to think about their strategy.
Excellent. Excellent. Let's look at AI now.
Mm.
So apparently AI is very good at recognizing patterns, at summarizing a great amount of data, at predicting. Now, from strategy perspective, how AI can help you speed up, make it more insightful, facilitate your strategy development process.
Yeah, an amazing area. You know, as we talk to more and more customers and analysts, everyone was asking us, what are you doing about AI? What are you doing about AI? It was the number one
Yes.
question. And so we thought, well, let's do it. Let's integrate it into our platform. Initially, we thought, great, we'll just use it for research. Go and get us competitor intelligence, go and identify
Mm-hmm.
market trends, that type of information. And that was great, right? And the realization of that was that used to be a team of 3 or 4 people in the consultancy doing that analysis, and it would take,
Mm-hmm.
weeks, and I've got it within a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting that intelligence, but also when I think about that and I think about doing strategy more frequently, that means I can get that in a few minutes on a regular basis, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
more going to be more, I can ask the question again, it's going to be more current, more up to date. And so that was the first area we went into, was the research area where it helps. And that brings the information to the people when they're making the decisions and thinking. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
other thing is, when you've run many of these strategy workshops like I have, the people in the room who don't do it very often are not only trying to answer the question you've put on the wall with the post-its, but they're trying to work out what the exercise is. And more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, they're trying to think, what type of information is he looking for? Is it at this level? Is it at this level? And so using the AI to give some examples,
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal at helping people suddenly start to understand the
Yes.
exercise, get some relevant information. Now, they don't need to take everything, but they can look at that and say, right, okay, now that's got me thinking. Let me start adding some of my own. So I think the AI is that kind, it can be a catalyst to help with the education and light the spark, if you like, for the type of information. And that was certainly around the research side. Having done that, we said, well, let's see if it can actually craft a strategy and create one. And what we did was we decided to pick a company just randomly, right? That we have no dealings with them, but we picked Tate and Lyle. And that because they've done quite a good job of articulating their material and their strategy. And in their annual report is their strategy growth framework, right? And we said, okay, let's use the AI. We will not mention the word Tate and Lyle. We will ask AI about the industry. And we will ask the AI to basically craft its version of this growth framework. And I think it came up with a better one without any interaction from ourselves. So it can help, for example, in triggering ideas. We ask it to visualize the future in this industry. And then by using words that describe that future, then you can start to build on those. But we went as far as, recommend the objectives, recommend the OKRs, all of these things, right? And we actually produced a report with all of this in. So I think it can play a bigger role in the development as well. And I would argue what we did in that seriously like less than a day, could have been you'd have paid more than £500,000, euros consultancy to do that. I'm not saying it doesn't need work. It does need work. It needs the human intervention, the crafting and everything. But it went a lot further than we thought it did. And then finally, we asked it to do the planning, to come up with the activities and estimate the costs. And so I think the way I look at it is it gives you a starter for 10 very quickly, helps educate you, sparks some ideas, starts to shape it. And I think it's a lot easier, especially when you're not doing strategy every day, if you've got something to look at and start to tune it, critique it, modify it. That's easier sometimes than starting with purely a white piece of paper. Now, the concern that I have through the whole process is a bit like, like the brain, when it's trying to solve a problem, its initial reaction is to try and find a solution that you've seen before. And if it does that, it kind of aligns that to the problem so it can close the brain down and conserve energy. And so my concern is if you are fostering up so quickly this content, will the people in the room suddenly stop, switch off, say that's the answer, and stop thinking, right? And so throughout this extremely powerful and capability, we've got to design into it human processes and activities that keep the brain stimulated to ask the questions. Otherwise, you just become lazy. And say, yes, that's the answer. And I think that's really, really important is you have to think through. It's not whether you need AI or not. AI is phenomenally powerful. You're going to use it. It's just how do you get the balance?
Yes.
Right? It's an important exercise.
Excellent. Can you give examples of those ways to stimulate the human brain? I mean, I wouldn't now sidetrack, but AI delivers fantastic results. But if you let people in between, like prompting again, giving feedback, it becomes amazing, next level. And if you have like agent to agent AI talking to each other at a much faster speed than talking or writing, then you have iterations and current level of AI interacting with each other kind of surpass the new versions. So very practical. Do you have any kind of recommendation, something tested to ensure people think along and keep their brains busy, so in the end the result would be even more phenomenal?
Yes, good question. So one of the things we found interesting around the AI was, so people have bias. And what you see in a workshop quite often when you're asking people to put ideas out is they just want to get their pet initiatives and projects on the table so that they're
Yes.
going to go forward, right? And in a way, they're biased towards what they already want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
they've got this blind spot, right? And the beauty of the AI is it calls out the blind spot. It calls
Mm-hmm.
out our bias. A lot of people are having a conversation about AI being biased. I think we're biased, and AI can help us
Yes.
not be biased. And so it calls out this blind spot. So let's say, and this has happened in real life for me, where we've gone through a strategy project with an exec board of a company, and you get to a certain stage, and they've not talked about sustainability at all. They've just
Mm-hmm.
talked
Mm-hmm.
about money, right?
Yes.
Operating costs and growth and that, right? And so, and the AI would have come up and gone, hey, what about the sustainability thing?
Yes.
In fact, on the Tate and Lyle example, the AI called out sustainability in a stronger position and resilience. That's when I would stop using the AI,
Mm-hmm.
say to the team, let's have a session now. We've got everything that you already talked about. Let's just focus on discussing sustainability or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the thing may be, and
Mm-hmm.
take them down a path where they have to think about that topic
Yes.
and their
Mm-hmm.
bias has not brought it up, because
Yes.
then you're forcing them to start to exercise the brain in an area where they've not been thinking. And I think that type of thing is what you have to do. So I think the facilitator
Mm-hmm.
has to start to think about actually exploring the undiscussed.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit like, we always say we should focus on the customer, but actually you
Mm-hmm.
want to have a discussion about the non-customers, the
Yes.
ones who
Mm-hmm.
didn't decide to buy and why. So I think that's the thing. The facilitator has to really think about, how can I open up some discussions and get
Mm-hmm.
that dialogue and discussion going, which is really stimulating people's brain. I think that's one of the best techniques, I think.
Amazing. Thank you. And just maybe out of curiosity, I have a mathematics background, master of mathematics, and I love predictive functionality and predictive power of AI. You've mentioned you use it for research big time, for planning, estimates, OKRs. Have you used it more predictive or even more simulating some scenarios, going ahead and saying and comparing a bit more like what if simulations?
Yeah, we've included stuff around benchmarking coming in.
Okay.
And so you can then take the market conditions and start to say, forecast what might happen under these conditions. Um, we've got scenario planning in there, which of course,
Mm-hmm.
so in scenario planning, you're very much looking at some of those macro trends
Mm-hmm.
and predict those forward and under certain situations, right? So we've done some of that. I would say at the moment, the way we treat it is there's always a human in the loop. And what we mean by that
Mm-hmm.
is, if the AI comes back, and it does come back sometimes with hallucinations, it makes
Yes.
something up, right?
Yeah.
That you don't take everything it's given you.
Mm-hmm.
What you do is you proactively select the bits of data that you want to take.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really nice for us in the way it's working is, when the AI comes back with some results, it comes back as individual data items that are then
Mm-hmm.
displayed on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
typically we're asking for a list of 10, what are the top 20 macro influences? What are the top 10 competitors? And so you can look at that data individually and
Mm-hmm.
decide, I want to take that into my model. I want to take that into my model. I don't want to take those three because either they're not relevant, one
Mm-hmm.
of them's a hallucination or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So I think there always has to be this kind of sense check at the moment in terms of what you take in or not. But yeah, it's surprisingly good, even down to, as I mentioned earlier in the planning, estimating the cost and the
Mm-hmm.
potential benefits from activities.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, you want to look at that, and you would certainly want to validate that, but at least it's about getting a rough shape to your strategy
Yeah.
and your plan. Then you
Yes.
can start to mold it. So one thing we do know is, and I'm sure you do, is it's only going to get better.
Yes, yes,
It's only going to get
absolutely.
better.
Amazing. Maybe can you tell us a bit what kind of AI have you used? Which tools? Just to be a bit more practical. For what purpose? Which AI? I know you have your own AI tool as well, but let's just look a little bit at the tool set.
Yeah. So what we're using is we're using ChatGPT 4. We're using a add into Excel. Because what that does is that brings the data back into tables, and then we're digesting that information into our platform. Now, the user of the platform doesn't see the Excel, doesn't see the ChatGPT form, right? That's all invisible to them. But effectively, that's what we're doing. But the model allows us to then potentially select other large language models into the tools as well. And then, as I mentioned, what we're bringing is that data in kind of table format, so individual records. But that's the kind of kit we're using at the moment. Yeah. So.
Excellent. Excellent. And you mentioned biased, and I love this comment that humans are even more biased and AI can help us to be less biased. What other ethical consideration we should have at strategy development and also at using AI to facilitate it?
Yeah, so I think the key here comes to your prompt engineering. It's you have to be really careful how you ask the questions. If you ask for financial results of your competitors, you don't state the year, you don't, what do you get, right? So you have to be, you do have to be quite specific. For example, when we started, and I'm ashamed to admit it, right? We were asking tools around the strategy and mentioning the word Tate & Lyle, and what we were getting, what he was coming back and we're going, wow, this is exactly what Tate & Lyle are doing. And then we realized, of course it is, because whatever they've published, it's spitting back,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So we then said, no, you can't do it that way. You have to go and look at the industry and not mention the actual company you're working with, right? You want a broader industry solution.
Yes.
So these decisions about the context, the scope, parameters at which you want to ask the question become really important, and how you engineer those into the prompt. It's, as you all know, it's so easy to write a question and get some answers and go, wow, I've got some answers. But you've got to really think about that. And I think so. I don't think so in ethics, then, and I think this is the thing, right? If you're a doctor, you're taught ethics. If you're a computer scientist or a data scientist, you're not taught ethics. Yet you still have the ability to influence life. So I think ethics we need to teach, and how it plays out is in how you ask the question and how you engineer the question. And I think that's the bit to focus on, right? It's always like, if you ever see the results, the first thing you should say, show me the question that was asked.
Yes.
Right? Because then you can see whether they were thinking about it in the right way.
Exactly. Just out of curiosity, do you have your own instance, in a sense, prompt engineering, asking the question is key. If you have your own instance, you could also give feedback, and like raising a child, raise your AI and kind of instill values and ethical consideration just by giving feedback on the answer. Do you bother to give feedback? Does your infrastructure allow? Would it learn from your feedback?
Yeah, so any data item has the ability for collaboration, feedback, and capturing additional information. So we have that built into the platform. That was there before AI, because you want to do that. it's a really interesting area, because if you ask, what we think is next around this topic, and this is why I think your question is very important, is we will move from just generic large language models to industry specific large language models, right? A lot richer in a specific set of industries. But the real step is when an organization's strategy and planning information becomes a large language model. If you like, it's the AI digital twin of the organization, right? Now, that's why it's so important, I think, for organizations to digitize their strategy and their planning information in one place, because you want that to become a large language model eventually. Now, imagine that platform has not only got your strategy and your plans and the recommendations from AI and the feedback that you just talked about, then you start to use that to interrogate and match that with your external industry model. You're starting to now create corporate memory around the strategic decisions you took, the results that happened. Was that decision successful? Was it not successful? What did it take to make that happen? All of that data starts to come in. Now, if you put that feedback in there as well, I think get to the stage where not only do companies have their own kind of AI corporate digital twin of the strategy and planning, but then add on the ability to change the way you communicate with AI. So instead of a typed script, it's now a conversation. I could be in a meeting and I could say, hey, see this idea I've got? Does this match our strategy? And actually the AI is going to speak back. It matches our strategy in 3 points. This is the area where it really supports our strategy. However, the last time, 3 times we tried to launch one of these, all 3 failures, right? So you can see us going down this path, right? Where actually, and I think that's an important interaction, is how do you get the interface to be so natural, i.e. conversation about you. And if we talk about this communication problem within companies around understanding the strategy, imagine if you've got your AI friend and you can ask it, which areas of the strategy should I be focusing on at the moment, right? What progress have I made in the areas around this? What are the things, are people thinking about in our organization that could help me achieve this? Those types of conversations that they're not here now, but they will be if you get your data and the quality of the data in place and organized.
Fantastic. Can you comment on how AI can help us measure success? In the big corporate, very often we have a great program and kind of benefits realization plan, but it gets kind of through the crack, the leadership change and so on. Now having this powerful brain AI, how can it help us, not just in strategic initiatives and programs, but strategy as a whole to measure success?
Yeah. So I think we all know organizations collect a lot of data. And that's happening more and more, right? If you think of IoT, collection of data from the shop floor, digital products, right? Visibility of supply chain, there's data everywhere, right? I think the challenge is, as we all know, there's a sea of data, an ocean of data, and it's difficult sometimes to see the wood for the trees, right? And so and when you ask people about performance of the organization, they're using whatever metrics have been developed and reports have been developed, but there's a lot more interesting, I'd say, lead indicators within the organization that are just not surfaced up to the top. And the investment to try and get that may be prohibitive. But AI, I think, if you're turning AI on your own data, has the ability to start to pull out trends, pull out performance numbers, and then provide that data back into the strategy. So you more and more you're wanting your strategy to become more and more real time in a way. I'm not saying you
Mhm.
change strategy real time, but what I'm saying is you're monitoring it and you're having discussions around it in a more regular basis. Then if you've got some tools that are actually, keeping an eye on your performance,
Mhm.
even just keeping an eye on competitors, right? I mean, if I don't know if
Mhm.
you've come across there's a great company out there, and their name just eludes me at the second, that is sweeping up all the financial data
Mhm.
about organizations, and all their listings and their company reports and the analyst reports, etc.,
Mhm.
and providing very in-depth financial information, even
Mhm.
down to sentiment data and everything on your competitors.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, and I think this is an important point as well. We have to think about is, when we talked about democratization of strategy, it doesn't have to just include people in the company.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's,
Mhm.
we are working in ecosystems, we are working in broader
Yes.
partnership. And so having a strategy process that actually
Mhm.
starts to move outside of the organization, and then coming back to the AI, having also thinking about what data out there can be shared and leveraged as well,
Mhm.
especially when you look at this bigger topic of sustainability. No company can solve that problem on its own, so you're
Mhm.
going to need to work together, which means you need to
Yes.
trust each other, which means you need to share information and strategies together to be able to
Mhm.
solve this problem. Then I think there's lots of opportunity for doing that, and getting more intelligence.
Yes, yes, I love that. This ecosystem thinking, and also having a very powerful AI agents, like you just mentioned, this observing all the financial results, which could be considered as
Yeah.
competitive, but having this input, putting into the dialogue, and then evolving the strategy. Very fascinating
And that
times we live
platform,
in. Mhm.
yeah, that platform exists today. You can go and
Yes,
buy that, right?
yes.
And
Hmm.
I was speaking with their team, and their goal actually is to turn that inside and actually point
Hmm.
their
Hmm.
sophisticated analysis engine that's sweeping all the external data, and say, actually, let's look at your internal data and do the same within the company to make everything
Yes,
more accessible and easier to
yes,
use.
yes. Two more questions. Um, One before last. Which advice, just one advice you would give to a leader in an organization who starts his strategy, either revamping the strategy or starting from scratch?
I would say think about doing it differently,
Mhm.
because the way it's been done for such a long time hasn't given us the best results. I'm not saying
Mhm.
it's always wrong. It hasn't just given good results, but it hasn't given us always the best result. And if you really want to be a people-led, purpose-led organization, think about doing your strategy different. That would be my one bit of advice. Don't just
Mhm.
go with, I'm going to pick, it's a bit like, I pick McKinsey because no one gets fired picking McKinsey.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
If they get it wrong, McKinsey got it wrong. It wasn't
Mhm.
me, right? So that's a cop out.
Okay,
I think
cool.
you've got to think about doing it differently, I think, if you want to get different results.
Mhm. Excellent. And last question to you, get your crystal ball out. What is
Crystal ball.
the ultimate frontier of AI?
That's such a difficult question, because I think, it's hard. That's a really hard question, because I
Mhm.
mean, what we're seeing and the speed at which it's now, I mean, it's been evolving for a long time, first of all,
Mhm.
right? So although a lot of people, it's kind of AI's a bit like it's crossed over into that consumer world, right? Where it used to be, only people with lots of money doing
Mhm.
things. Now it's become a consumable thing that we can all experiment and play with. Um, so it's made that transition, and that's what's causing all of this excitement. But I think for me, it the goal is we have some big problems in the world, right? You know, we talked a lot about the sustainability one, but this geopolitical issues that are existing, right, are out there too, and other things. So, what's the ultimate kind of goal? I think is, you know, how can AI help take away and call out early and make more visible some of the negative actions so that we live in a better place.
Excellent.
You know, like I talked about that bias thing, calling out our
Mm-hmm.
bias. Well, if
Mm-hmm.
AI can do more to keep things
Mm-hmm.
on the straight
Mm-hmm.
that we would all want, and it calls those out and it identifies those and it creates the information to challenge those things,
Mm-hmm.
then that could be a very good thing, couldn't it?
Excellent, excellent. And maybe I'll add one more, because we've mentioned, you know, sustainability, resilience as a macro trend, and we've mentioned democratizing strategy on a corporate level, and you've mentioned maybe a bit of an ecosystem level. But if you look at the world, you know, we have the climate kind of change as a sustainability challenge. Can we apply democratizing, you know, the strategy for example, solving the climate change, involve the stakeholders across the globe? It's just, if we imagine not corporate perspective, but the world perspective.
No, exactly. I mean, we use it in the context of a company, but there's nothing to stop us using a platform to solve a world challenge that actually has 100 of the best people equipped to solve that challenge, but actually now pulled together on a platform, creating a strategy and an action plan and monitoring a plan to solve that challenge, right? There's no reason why we can't do that, right? Because the technology certainly allows you to add people into that strategy and have those conversations. So yeah, I think and that's quite important. I think even for, you know, people talk about us having to change governance at a kind of country level, because we need to get together to solve challenges. So yeah, I think you just got to decide your target challenge, but democratize who's involved, and that should be different types of people. One of the interesting things we didn't talk about very quickly was when we did hand out this to lots of people, people found their voice. Sometimes in workshops, people don't speak too much because they're uncomfortable. It's not who they are. They don't feel they can get in. By democratizing us on a platform, it enables greater inclusion and more people to find their voice. Because sometimes people are comfortable typing something, not necessarily saying it when there's bigger leaders around or whatever. And so I think this ability to help people, different people, find their voice, technology can help with that, right? Because you're moving sometimes some of those physical, situational, environmental things that people struggle with. I'm in a big group, I don't feel I can say something people may think I'm silly. Afterwards, they type something in. And so I think that from an inclusion point of view, I think there's a lot of power. And inclusion then is not just more people from different organizations, but it's at different levels, but it's different types of people, and it's people who engage differently, right? And maybe they need more time to think about it and articulate their question, but when they come up with it, it's super powerful. So I think those points are really important.
Yes, amazing vision for the end. Thank you so much, Craig.
Thank you.
Great insights. Wishing you fair wind on your kind of journey to democratize strategy.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.